Today we are at a critical milestone in our video series where we examine the economic and political foundations of the international order, brick by brick. When the storm of Napoleon that swept through Europe subsided, it left behind a continent in ruins and a world order left leaderless. In this episode, we take a closer look at the Congress of Vienna, the birth pangs of modern diplomacy, where kings, diplomats, and empires sat around a table in Vienna to negotiate how to redistribute the world. If you haven't watched the previous videos in the series, I strongly recommend starting from the very beginning, because each chapter is built upon the foundations of the previous one. If you're ready, let's begin. With Napoleon's final defeat at Waterloo, the Napoleonic Wars, which were on the scale of a world war, came to an end. France, the greatest power in Europe that had challenged the British Empire and its allies for a full 150 years, had accepted defeat. When Napoleon first went into exile in 1814, the victors of the war, Austria, Britain, Prussia, and Russia, began negotiating the New World Order in Vienna. This Congress is one of the economic and political turning points of modern times. The Congress of Vienna is the first of the historic gatherings where the world order was decided, such as the later Paris Peace Conference, 1919, the Potsdam Conference, 1945, and the final settlement with respect to Germany, Moscow Treaty, 1990. What makes the Congress of Vienna unique is that it was the first peace treaty in which international spheres of influence were distributed at a diplomatic table for the first time. Moreover, this conference was much more successful than the three modern conferences mentioned above. The system established by the Congress of Vienna protected the international order from a disaster on the scale of a world war for 100 years until 1914. This success was made possible by the Congress of Europe mechanism established among the great powers. This mechanism aimed to maintain balance through regular meetings of ambassadors and joint interventions during times of crisis. While the 1919 Paris Peace Treaty, which ended the First World War, laid the foundations for World War II with its heavy and unjust conditions, the Potsdam Conference, held as the final curtain of World War II fell, triggered the Cold War. In the Moscow Treaty that ended the Cold War, we are experiencing the Ukraine war today because the unwritten and vague guarantees, such as the verbal guarantees given to the Russian Federation, the successor to the Soviet Union that NATO would not expand, were hollow. Another point that makes the Vienna Conference unique is that all five parties representing the great powers were each excellent negotiators in their own right. The British Empire was represented by Foreign Secretary Lord Castlereagh, Austria, by Chancellor Prince Clemens von Metternich, Prussia by Prime Minister August von Hardenberg, Russia by Tsar Alexander I, and defeated France by Foreign Minister Prince Charles Maurice de Talleyrand. The British position aimed to position the British Empire as the sole superpower of the international order by preserving the gains of the war. The British Navy certified this superiority all over the world, except for continental Europe. However, within the framework of classical diplomacy, the British did not desire the Russian Empire to become the sole continental power after the defeat of France. For this reason, the British would seek a balance with Austria and Prussia against the greatest power in continental Europe, which in 1815 was Russia. While Lord Castlereagh skillfully implemented this balance of power policy, he worked closely with Metternich and Talleyrand to prevent the excessive expansion of Russia and Prussia, and even strengthened the balance by including France at the table as the fifth great power. This position is the ancestor of the complex chain of alliances established by the USA after 1945 in Western Europe and the Far East against the Soviet Union. The British also wanted France to be surrounded by stronger neighboring states so that it could never again threaten the New World Order. For this purpose, the reverse of the system created by Napoleon with weak and satellite states on the borders of France would be implemented. The delegation of the Russian Empire was directly under the leadership of Tsar Alexander I. Russia, on the one hand, aimed to seize a large slice of Poland after its partition, while on the other hand, it had its eye on the Slavic population in the Balkans. The Russian Tsar was aware of his enormous superiority over the Ottoman Empire, and he desired to use this superiority without the hindrance of Britain and Austria. Russia's greatest trump card at the conference was its army stationed in the rural area outside Paris. This influence was so unforgettable that in 1945, when Soviet leader Stalin was asked if he was pleased that the victorious Soviet armies had captured Berlin and Vienna, he simply replied, "Alexander I reached Paris." Tsar Alexander maintained a determined stance on the Polish issue, even challenging at one point that 8 million Poles would rise at my voice. However, as a result of diplomatic pressure, he settled for a limited autonomous structure under the name of Congress Poland. The Austrian Chancellor von Metternich would become the true architect of the Vienna Order despite his difficult position. As early as 1815, the multinational structure of the empire was giving signals of danger. The Austrian economy was completely dependent on continental Europe. It had no colonies to engage in profitable overseas trade, while its ancient enemy France, which could rise at any moment, existed to its west. A much more dangerous rival, Russia, had emerged in the east. Metternich and Alexander I, representing two multinational empires, were also trying to put back into the bottle the two dangerous genies that the French Revolution had released. The French Revolution had proven on the one hand that peasants, workers, and the petty bourgeoisie could seek their rights and do so by using force if necessary. The other dangerous idea spread by the revolution was nationalism. Against these trends, which later became parts of left and right movements, the response of Austria and Russia would be the classical conservatism that formed the basis of the existing multinational empires. Metternich, with his conservative vision that would earn him the title of the Policeman of Europe, strengthened secret police networks to prevent the spread of revolutionary ideas, and became one of the intellectual fathers of the Holy Alliance. An important problem for Austria was that the large number of principalities and kingdoms in the region defined as Germany were increasingly coming under the influence of the Kingdom of Prussia. Austria desired the continuation of the current order by restricting Prussia's presence in Germany, and was also trying to grab a share of the partitioned Poland. Prussia's goal was to seize rich Saxony in the Ruhr region and to obtain the region it called West Prussia from partitioned Poland. Prussia's greatest fear was that France would rise in the future, crush the weak German states, and reach the Prussian border. Therefore, Prussia would propose the dismemberment of France at the conference. Similar attempts would be seen after World War I, when France insisted on the dismemberment of Germany, and after 1945, when Germany was divided into military occupation zones by the four victorious countries. Although Prime Minister Hardenberg was insistent on these demands, he ultimately could only take about 40% of Saxony. In return, strategic industrial areas such as the Rhineland and Westphalia would strengthen Prussia in the long run. Prince de Talleyrand, who defended the French position, was a formidable and unique man. He had been involved in diplomacy and politics since before the French Revolution. He had escaped losing his head to Robespierre's guillotine during the Terror, the most dangerous period of the Revolution, and subsequently served as foreign minister under the revolutionary governments of the Directory, the Consulate, and Napoleon. Now he was the foreign minister of the Bourbon dynasty, which had placed the French crown on its head after Napoleon. He was trying to repair the damage of the bad legacy left to France by Napoleon's defeat in Vienna. Talleyrand protested the decisions made by the Big Four behind closed doors, defended the rights of small states, and over time gained the trust of Castlereagh and Metternich to make France an equal partner at the table. This mastery went down in history as the diplomatic victory of a defeated country. The conference was completed 9 months later, 9 days before Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo. Although Napoleon Bonaparte was a great commander, who would be called the Marshal of Marshals, his final defeat in 1815 was inevitable. Even if Napoleon had won at Waterloo, the Allies' victory was indisputable due to their enormous military and economic superiority. Napoleon's fate was sealed when he was forced to retreat from Moscow in October 1812. During the 1812 Russian campaign, more than 600,000 soldiers of the Grande Armée perished due to freezing, hunger, and the Russian winter, and only about 85,000 soldiers were able to return. This catastrophe brought France's human and resource reserves to the point of exhaustion, and struck the final blow with the defeat at Leipzig, 1813, and the subsequent fall of Paris. As a result of the Congress of Vienna, the international order was formed as follows. Russia took the largest share from the partition of Poland. It obtained the east of the country and Warsaw. It retained Finland, which it had seized from Sweden. It also continued its southward expansion by taking Bessarabia from the Ottomans. Although Prussia could not take all of Saxony, it obtained a large part of this region. From the partitioned Poland, it obtained Posen, today's Poznan, the region known as West Prussia. It also added the important port city of Danzig to its lands. In the Rhineland, it also won Saarland, which had important coal reserves, and also the Moselle region. These gains would open the door to the Ruhr Valley, which would make Prussia advantageous in terms of the Industrial Revolution. The victors of the war did not unite the German states, but made them into a strong confederation against France. The mosaic of 300 kingdoms, principalities, and duchies that remained of the old Holy Roman Empire was transformed into the German Confederation, consisting of 39 small states. While Austria and Prussia retained their voting rights within the old structure, Austria would be the leader of this confederation. The former Austrian Flanders was given to the Kingdom of the Netherlands, that is, today's Belgium. Britain took Malta, the Cape Colony, part of today's Republic of South Africa, and Ceylon. There was no longer any power in India that could be a rival to Britain. These colonial gains reinforced the overseas dominance of the British commercial empire. The west of France was to be occupied by the Allies for 5 years. The Allies would end this symbolic occupation in 1818. Austria won Tarnopol, Salzburg, Tyrol, the Venice region, Lombardy, and Ragusa in Dalmatia. Thus it established a strong presence in northern Italy and gained access to the Balkans. The Pope was restored to his sovereignty over Rome. After the Papal States had been seriously weakened during the French Revolution and the Napoleonic era, the Congress of Vienna returned the papacy to its former sovereignty, and Pope Pius VII was once again placed at the head of Rome and the surrounding territories as both a spiritual and temporal ruler. France was returning to its pre-French Revolution borders. Now stronger states had been created on its borders: the Kingdom of the Netherlands in the north, the Kingdom of Piedmont in the southeast, Prussia in the Rhineland, and the German Confederation in Germany. The territorial integrity of Spain, whose crown was returned to a separate family branch of the Bourbons, was guaranteed. The same guarantee would be given to Poland against Germany in the 1930s. The Vienna Order also condemned slavery. Although British diplomacy was insistent on the abolition of slavery, it could not get this accepted. But the Imperial Navy patrolling the Atlantic would prevent the slave trade to some extent. This was the first time in history that the great powers declared the slave trade contrary to humanity through a joint declaration. Castlereagh had brought this issue to the table under pressure from thousands of petitions from the British public, and had to settle for moral condemnation and naval patrols instead of a full ban. The British Empire was now the sole superpower of the New World Order. The British had completely monopolized naval power. British naval power both supported economic superiority against its rivals and gave the option of economically strangling its rivals by blockading them as it desired. The strength of British naval power in 1815 is similar to the ability of the USA to use air power unrivaled since 1943. The capacity of the British naval power and merchant fleet also facilitated the supply of British goods to the faster developing markets of North America, the West Indies, Latin America, India, and the Far East, as well as the procurement of raw materials. The British had created a balance for Europe in Vienna, but this balance did not apply to overseas markets and new colonies. The British would ruthlessly use their undisputed superiority in this area without any negotiation. Furthermore, England was in the midst of a massive production revolution, the first industrial revolution. Their insistence on the abolition of slavery was not based only on humanism and liberalism. The Industrial Revolution needed workers, not slaves. The Vienna Order brought stability to Europe for about a century after the Napoleonic storm and established the principles of reconciliation and balance among the great powers. Although this system dampened revolutionary waves and nationalist explosions for a while, it would eventually be tested by new forces such as the Industrial Revolution, liberal ideas, and nationalism. Nevertheless, as one of the most successful peace architectures in diplomatic history, it prepared the ground for the conflict-free period of the next century and left a lasting legacy of how the international order is negotiated. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and click the notification bell for the continuation of such in-depth analyses. In the next episode of our Story of the Global Order series, we will examine the era of the unipolar world and Pax Britannica, where Britain established its absolute dominance over the seas in all its aspects. I wish you clear-minded and informative days, and remember, latet enim veritas, sed nihil pretiosius veritate.